Limboshire. The First Fall of Limboshire. Chapter 5. The sisterly home carer. She had visited the younger brother several nights running, assisting in his redevelopment of the model villages. He had been having her decorating the interiors of the room, the model houses, which involved opening the boxes out and then colouring in various wallpaper or pasting on some of the paper onto miniature posters. Then there were the little furnishings that she had to look through a microscope to see. Some of the furnishings were so small, trying to sew together miniature pillows. And then the little miniature vehicles that wheeled around the miniature roads that he was painting currently. Outside, there were the road signs, the small lamp post, the miniature bins, phone boxes, benches, all different paraphernalia surrounding the long rolled out roads that were really only coloured in, drawn onto the matting. There were islands of gardens too. There were really small miniature gatherings of small weeds and plants that were in small containers, with various indoor plants too that were used. But next to the miniature houses, the miniature gardens, and the coloured drawings of the miniature roads, there were the models of the miniature people that were stationary, little figurines that were placed that could balance themselves or were leaning on the various models. There were small weeds growing up that looked like giant plants. The grass was as tall as bamboo stalks, a snail the size of a car. She had inquired about the various styles, the colours and the shapes, the different aesthetics of the different designs, the decorations and the furnishings of the different model homes, what ones they ought to have, getting some guide as to the different colour schemes that David wanted her to do, how to place the right style within a different context. And he gave a long talk about the different aesthetics, what different things were beautiful to him and pleased him. He gave her case note studies. There were studies on the different model houses, different architectural guides, and there were all different maps and drawings, how to put together different constructions of the miniature furniture, and all different ranges of colours and shapes and styles, different pictures. There were catalogues of those things that he was looking at buying. The previous histories of the different model houses he showed her too. There were long detailed stories about the current residents. He wrote stories about the model people that lived inside the model houses. They were approximate to the size of Lego Man in size. Very small, you could handle a whole handful of them in one hand. But each of them had a unique combination of personal traits. They had their own different colour, their different style, their different shape and size. Each was unique. There was a backstory that he'd written on each of the figurines, the miniature people. He'd written extensively on a small handful of them. He had about a dozen or two of them. Some of them that moved, they could wheel around if they were pushed or wound up. The majority of them were stationary, and he would take different pictures of them to accompany the various stories that he'd written about them too. He was thinking about doing a film, maybe making an animation of some of the figurines as they moved around, driving through on their model cars, or perhaps just stood around stationary in the model gardens betwixt the model houses. He had recorded a few shorts of them, but no great long monologues, and no great movements of it. No stop motion pictures yet. He'd just done a few pictures, just to accompany a few of the readings. He recorded a compendium of chronological episodes of the various characters, trying to develop a few of their different relationships. The various reports that he'd written about the individuals, the relationships of individuals within the group dynamics that shifted. He'd written many reports about that. There was a whole stack of papers, a whole tower of them. The home carer was amazed to study, though she didn't really read only just a few paragraphs of them, just a few random excerpts, dipping into it here and there randomly. It was just far too much to go to at any great length. He'd written extensively about the environment surrounding the model village too, a pretend hypothetical one, of course, but he wrote as authentically as he could about the actual real houses, albeit they were miniature model houses. And of course, he wrote about some of the wild plants that grew there too, describing them as such. The reports were so numerous, and oftentimes they seemed a little conflicted, even in the brief few that she'd read. She felt it was just too much to go into it all. After the visit, she confronted the older brother, Sol, on one of the occasions, when he had greeted her at the door as she was about to leave. Isn't all this a bit too much, though? Spending all time creating all the model villages and then all the model figurines, and then writing all about the model people with the model stories? Isn't it all just a distraction, an indulgence, escapism, a distraction from living? Complained and asked the sisterly home carer. I mean, we're living in a real village with real people, aren't we? Why all this obsession about model houses and model people? Asked the home carer. She was outspoken, stood in the hallway, some distance from Sol, who she saw as a half-elderly brother figure. Sol considered the answer, thinking over it. To the home carer, the sister, it seemed a reasonable question to ask of him, the older brother, although it might be a loaded accusation, perhaps. No, Sol had said finally, defensively. No, it's not really an escape from reality or life at all. It's his way of coping or reflecting on it sometimes, mediating on it. But it is sometimes a bit of a distraction, but it isn't always. It doesn't have to be, pleaded Sol on David's behalf. But it's just so contained and isolated, and he's so consumed by a fictitious family in what is a fictitious world. Well, a fictitious village anyway, complained the home carer. My dear, the whole world is fantasy. Everyone is. Everyone's obsessed and into it. It's not just him. Not just David at all. Look at the ancient love of storytellers, for example, orators, actors, writers, directors, or even the modern love of films, soap operas. How many people watch multiple soap operas every day of the week? If our love of stories is a crime suddenly, then what about theatre goers, TV viewers, radio listeners, internet surfers, newspapers, journalists, bloggers, tweeters, bookers, librarians, posters, amateur dramatics, parents telling their children bedtime stories? We all do it in different ways, of course we do. And I don't think he does it to that greater extent. Yes, he spends a lot of time constructing the different figurines and the model houses, but he enjoys doing that. And it's a skill that can be transferred onto other jobs and other things as well. Now, I think we all have a love of fantasy. Maybe it's our way of coping with reality, reflecting on it sometimes. If he does it a little bit more to some extent, then perhaps it's just something he relied on while he was alone so much, complained Sol, now in David's defence, when so often he was criticising his brother. It was unusual to be coming to his defence now. Well, I never meant to imply it was a crime or anything that serious. More kind of, well, I don't know, an emotional problem, a mental problem of some sort. Detachment. Perhaps he's just too detached. Because his fantasy world is just so ubiquitous. There's so much of it. It's what? Said Sol. I mean, it's all surrounding, clarified the home carer. Well, he doesn't spend all time directing his plays or going to do his model shows with the other modelers. He just does it some of the time. He works and studies, visits mum. He does a lot of other things. Yes, he does that a lot of the time, but at least he's not getting into trouble, taking drugs, drinking, getting into arguments, any number of other things. There's a lot worse things he could be doing, said Sol, continuing David's defence now. Well, what's that then? I mean, apart from going to see your mother, he hasn't really been working at all. And I don't know that he studies to do anything. All his studies revolve around his model figurine characters or the model houses. Once he's finished those, he's just writing all the time about them or just talking to other model makers. And that's all he does, as far as I can see, complained the home carer once more. She left it all like an accusation, like she'd had him on trial somehow. She was somehow the inspector in all this. Well, we all serve each other, to be honest. Yes, he could visit Mum a lot more. He could certainly help me round the house with the housework a lot more. Yes, sometimes it takes up more of the time. I tell him often enough. But I don't think he could ever give it up, not altogether. He relies on it too much, and it does serve a lot of good uses. He meets some people, the other model makers. Yes, he certainly should visit Mum more, though. But I think he tries when he can. We try and serve each other. It's more mutual, really, tried to plead Sol. Really? Is that what you want me to think? Or does he actually agree with you? I mean, is he happy with you too? I mean, you're both complaining at me. I can't speak to him, Maybe it's better you do. If we ever have a serious blow up, he always goes to Mom. She reconciles things with us. Somehow he can talk to her. He just goes off at me and to others as well. But he can talk to Mom. Then he calms down. Once he's called okay, then she'll translate everything. She talks to me and explains it. I don't know how. Somehow it works that way. But we get on. When he comes back here and he cools down, we get on all right. Somehow when we de-escalate things, he tears away for a few weeks or however long. It comes back and things are all right again, says Sol, trying to explain the situation. I can't speak for him. He's here, you can ask him. We try and work for each other when we can, and when we can't, he leaves, has a break, and then usually we're better afterwards, after some time. It does take some time. And sometimes he can go a bit wild. He shouts terrible things. But I just tell him to go at that point. He's got his mum's to go to. The home carer nodded along. She knew it all from the mother's side, of course. Maybe he can't say that he wants to leave. I don't know, thought the home carer. Maybe he wants to live with Mum or with friends, perhaps. Maybe he'd get on better with them. Maybe he doesn't know how to contact the outside world that well, though. So he can only contact people about the model people or model houses or, I don't know, all those stories. He can't talk about real things with real people. He can only talk about the model houses with real people, said the home carer, finally feeling maybe she'd understood the new emerging brother after all. No one can direct him also without being directed. I think that's how he has it. He will never submit to someone unless they're part of this model village or they're interested in it somehow. Because his mum is all the time. That's probably why he goes round there. They're always going on about it. Maybe it's that. Only on his grounds. Only when it's about his model village and his model people, said the home carer, as if perhaps she got him finally. They'd been strolling as they talked, finally sitting in the lounge area, where they sat opposite each other, at Sol's large dining table. She often looked at him, but he always seemed to be looking away, never quite meeting her gaze, never for too long. Well, he does go out often. He does travel sometimes, gets his exercise, going between yo-yoing to Mum's. But usually he's got a few of the model makers, He sees them online mostly. There's one that he visits, well, occasionally. But he gets going on these projects. If he's not engaging with the world, then he's detached from it, separate. But it does vary. So he's always reflecting on the world when he's not actually part of it. But he does spend too long reflecting, yes. And I do think it's an emotional issue. You're right there. Absolutely. I'm not a therapist or psychiatrist, whatever it is. I don't know. Perhaps he should have been referred a long time ago. Mum was saying that. We don't know how to, and we don't think he'd go anyway. Every time she or I suggest it, he snaps and he won't hear of it, complains Sol. Sometimes he's okay and it doesn't seem so bad. Sometimes, well, it feels like we're living in limbo with him. I just don't know what to do. We'll talk to Mum about it. She doesn't know either, shrugged Sol, looking a bit unsure now what to say, feeling perhaps he flummoxed saying too much. Well, perhaps we're all a bit concerned. I know your Mum is, but perhaps you'll find an answer in time. Maybe it will just take time, she said. I just don't know, Sol shrugged, looking away from her once more. What do you mean you don't know? I mean, this is limbo, isn't it? We all live with not knowing all the time. We should be used to that by now. Things could be a lot worse, and it could be a lot better, of course, said the home carer, going on. It could be a lot worse. It used to be long ago. Yes, I know that. Oh, it's practically a mantra in this house. It could be a lot worse, absolutely. But what does it really mean, though? I mean, living in limbo. Yes, it could be a lot worse, but it also could be a lot better. I just want to see him out there, happier, thriving, working with others, living with others again. I don't want to see him living cooped up with his older brother, trapped in his yo-yo relationship between me and his mum all the time. That's not a life for a young man. He should be out there living, working with people, studying with people, partying with them, having relationships with them, romances, breakups, all that sort of thing. He's missing out on it all. He should be out there living, working, streaming with people, struggling with people, everything. He's missing out on everything. And it's just not right. And I just worry for him that it's gone on so long, protested Soul, going on. It's not right him living in limbo, betwixt worlds, and never in one world all the time. It's just not right, complained Soul, going on more. But I don't know how to solve his emotional issues. Neither does Mum, so it seems. But is it just avoiding those issues and not addressing the actual emotions, actually failing to solve the problems? I mean, maybe the both of you haven't tried. You haven't sat down together and tried to have a mediation, or no, he won't listen, interrupted Soul. He just flies off the handle and gets really angry. He gets provoked too easily. If you try and discuss any of the really sensitive issues, well, maybe it's finding the right time and the right place to do it. And when he's in the right mood and he's happy, and oh, that's the worst time to do it because he's totally absorbed with whatever happy project he's engaged in. No, you've got to get him when he's neutral, when he's just sort of lopsing around, laping around the place, mulching around, doesn't know what to do. When he's fairly okay and he's not obsessively happy or deliriously sad or angry, as he so often is, and he locks himself away, to be fair, when he is, tries to distract himself with his projects. But when he is okay on those rare occasions, I need him for other things. The housework. Mum's got her own problems. I do too. There's lots of things going on at the house that he's got to help us with. And if he doesn't do those chores, the house here doesn't function properly, went on Sol. I know, said the home carer, meeting his eyes and staring at him now. Finally, he met her eyes. I know what you're going through, and I know it's a lot. You've all got your own issues too. Maybe it's finding someone else that can help also, someone that's trained and has a better understanding of what he's going through. He has serious problems. I admit I've not spent enough time in it, and I will try and find the right people to speak to that maybe can help me and Mum dealing with him more. It is a problem that's been growing, but we cope with it as much as we can. Every now and again, something will happen that just gets out of hand. I guess that's why he hasn't been going out to work or going out doing things, because then things escalate and something awful happens then, because he's already carrying a lot on his plate already, and then things just snap and escalate. And I don't want to see anyone get hurt or him, and I don't want to see him hurt anyone. I worry that he could get hurt, and I worry more he could hurt someone, probably by accident, and doing something stupid and clumsy and crazy, knowing him. Probably not on purpose, with his temper, just wandering out on the road, or just clambering into something, obsessing about some thought or worry. You haven't seen what he gets like when he's like that. Hysterical, obsessive, complained Sol, now looking back over the incidents that had happened during the escalations in the past. Well, I can see it was a problem in the past. Maybe that's why you've avoided trying to go out or push him too much into some of the work programs. I can see why you've been overcautious. If there were such serious problems, you don't want him to hurt others or to get hurt by others or to hurt himself even. It's just finding the right people that he can work through and get the emotional support. Maybe in time he'll be able to go out more then.